Hey guys, welcome to the knife shop. I'm Aaron with Aleeknives, and tonight we're going to build a budget-friendly knife. We're not going to use all these high-end tools that I have and that I incorporate in my shop. We're going to use nothing more than an angle grinder, some files, some sandpaper, and some good old-fashioned elbow grease. I'm going to show you how, even if you don't have all these tools, you can even create a high-end knife in your own garage at home. So let's jump right in. Let's start with a piece of 3/16 by 1.5 1084 bar stock. That's a nice thicker stock. There's a reason that I chose this stock. I decided to do a dagger for this build, so I went ahead and drew up a symmetrical dagger. If you guys don't know how to draw a dagger, all you have to do is decide how big your stock is, draw a center line, and you only draw half of the dagger, and then you fold it over, and that makes a perfectly symmetrical template for you. That way both sides will be the same. The reason that I chose to do this design is because after we lay it out, check it out, there's not a ton of material to remove here. Now I decided to use the good old paint method on this one, and I picked up an old can of spray paint, and that's exactly what it was. It didn't spray very well, but it did the trick here. There we go. Now we got a template to work off of. You see almost all knife makers profile their knives with an angle grinder, and that's for a reason. An angle grinder works really well to do this. Put a cutoff wheel in it, go to town, you can cut all these slits and then connect the dots. It's a pretty easy way to remove the excess material. It's way better than going at it with a file. When you work one of these with just a file, it takes a long time and you're going to wear your arm out before you even get to the bevels. Now I'm going to show you a couple new things on this. This is a good way to profile the knife. After you've cut off the majority of it, you want to keep your profile nice and square 90 degrees. This is a good way to hold your blank at 90 degrees to your angle grinder so that you can go ahead and do your profile and try to keep it nice and crispy. I'd like to give a special thanks to Empire Abrasives. Currently, they're the largest supporter of my channel. I will put that as the first link in the video description for you to go over there, look at their products. If you decide to purchase something, enter Aleeknives at the end during checkout. It's going to save you some bucks, so you're welcome. The link's below. I'm going to go ahead and lay out some blue Dykem layout dye on this bad boy because we're going to give it some layout lines. It's incredibly important on a dagger build to give yourself some layout lines so that you can check your symmetry from one side to the other throughout the build cycle. You know, you want to go ahead and give yourself 90-degree lines at the top and bottom so you can check one side to the other. Hey guys, hopefully you're getting some enjoyment out of the video and maybe gaining some knowledge. If you are, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, and after you hit the subscribe button, go down below in the comments and leave me a quick comment saying I subbed, and I'll respond to you down there. Feel free to ask me questions. I always try to answer all the questions down in the comment section, so I look forward to seeing you guys down there. Thanks. Here I'm going to go ahead and pick up one of my favorite round files. I've decided to make these cutouts the size of the file just for ease of building. If you make the cutouts the same size as the file, then you can go ahead and just put your blank in a jig or a vise like this, and you can use the vise jaws to keep you straight from one side to the other. Here you'll see me check my symmetry. To get the shape that I want on the top of my scales, I just looked around the shop until I found something that was the right size circumference that I was looking for. And then I will lay it on here, center it up, and then just scribe a line. There we go. So that's going to be the shape of my handle scale. Now I can take some measurements on where I want to drill these holes to hold my handle scales on. I've laid out where I would like to see my pins. I've just got this little tiny center punch here. You don't have to punch your holes. I like to, because I want them right where I want them. Ouch. Alright, now I told you I was going to use nothing more than hand tools. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So I just got my hand drill. I went ahead and grabbed the drill bits that are the right size for my pins. And when you come in here, make sure you're straight up and down. Well, Shoot. That didn't work out at all. Not even close. Okay, so what I should have done is I should have drilled a pilot hole with a much smaller drill bit, because this larger drill bit walked off my line, the top and the bottom. This one walked a little bit this direction here, and this one walked a little bit that way. Even though I center punched it, I could have used a center drill, which is a much more rigid drill bit, to start the hole. That would have been a really good idea. Obviously, I don't use a hand drill very often, but this is lesson learned. So what I'm going to do to fix this, because I still want my pins to land in this area and this area, is I'm going to drill these out to a larger hole here so that my pin will still fit within it. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just drill these out to a larger hole, and then we're going to also drill some weight reducing holes in this tang. And there we go. I'm not too fussed about these not being straight. In fact, I didn't even try to align these. I just shotgun hold these in, because it doesn't matter where they go. Just as long as they're relatively in the center. You're not going to feel a weight balance difference between left and right on that. We need to describe the center line on the cutting edge that we're going to grind all the bevels down to, so that we get a nice straight cutting edge and it doesn't wander or wave. I just like to use a drill bit. One thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to select a drill bit that is slightly smaller than the thickness of the blade. And you do that because you don't want to scribe a line right down the center. You want to scribe parallel lines that leave about the thickness of a nickel or a dime in the middle, preferably a nickel. I like to leave a nice fair amount of material just to make sure that before heat treat that I have plenty of material left to fix problems if I have any warps or anything like that. I have found when you're using the drill bit method, don't rotate the drill bit. Hold it in your hand. That way you keep the point, just in case the point wanders slightly, you keep the point in the exact same place, and you can scribe your lines. There we go. See how thick I left that? I left that pretty thick. And that's good. Well, I thought this was a good idea all the way until it wasn't. You'll see. Alright, so the first thing that I tried was to put my grinder in the vise like this, and I put a flap wheel in it, and I approached it like I would normally approach my 2x72 grinder, like so, where I was trying to grind my bevels like this. And what that was giving me with the flap wheel was a convex grind. And I really wanted more of a flat grind, so I replaced the flap disc with a grinding wheel, and I came across. And that actually was producing some pretty crisp lines for me, but the problem that I was running into was the hub in the center stands out a little taller than the disc. So in order for me to get a flat grind, I'd have to come underneath the hub. And I wasn't able to get all the way in the ricasso area of my blade. So I determined that I didn't like that method either. So what I did was this. In about less than 5 minutes, I set up a file jig. This is so simple, guys. Look how easy this premise is. All I did was I took a file and I attached it to a rod with some hose clamps. I put some duct tape on this side around the hose clamp so it won't hurt me. I screwed the knife to the bench right here. I decided what angle I wanted to put it at, and I put a couple boards there, and that's it. I mean, so simple. Let me show you how easy this is to work. This is a really effective method for doing this. This is quite enjoyable, guys. I forgot how much I enjoyed this process. You know, I set myself up a nice seat here. It's not loud like the machines are. You don't have a lot of vibration. You know, this actually lays out your lines for you, so you get really crisp lines. And I enjoy this. Look how even that bevel's coming out. Already, just spot on. Okay, so this is my second bevel done. You'll see I screwed the knife down. I put a stop here so the blade can't move. And I put a stop here so that I have a place to stop right here. Now, this isn't where my bevel will end. I put a stop here to rough in all 4 bevels. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this line right here and I'm going to feather it into this guard area so it'll come right out of the guard and into the bevel. Right there in this gentle swoop on both sides. But I'm not going to cut that in yet. When it comes to filing in bevels, I think the important part is to make yourself comfortable. Set up your filing jig, get yourself a nice seat right here, and just get into a nice comfortable position. It doesn't take a tremendous amount of pressure. It just takes the movement of letting the file do the work, remove the material, and just let it go. You know, a lot of times I'll turn on some music. I will tell you, this has already cost me a candy bar and a bag of Skittles, and I still have one more bevel left. I did jump into doing a dagger, so there's 4 bevels to grind, and these are tall flat grinds also. So this is a labor-intensive build to do this way, but for a dagger, getting all these bevels to line up, this is probably the easiest way to get accurate bevels to all line up symmetrically, is to put it in a jig and file these out, because you get these just perfectly crisp lines at the top of the bevels and down the center ridge. And I'm going to show you, after I get this bevel cut in, I'm going to show you what that looks like, because it does come out just perfect. There it is, guys. Now, what I did decide is that I'd like to take this cutting edge here down a little bit thinner before heat treatment and get it a little closer to final dimensions. So, I want you to see how I set this up. I just have a sled here, and on my sled I I clamped this down to the table so this doesn't move, and then I took these 2 boards and I clamped those down on top to get the angle that I wanted. Now, if I want to thin out my cutting edge, I have to steepen my angle. All I have to do is move these boards slightly closer, and that'll raise this and steepen my angle. It's very simple, guys. This is, you know, you could set one of these up without actually making anything. It's just a couple boards laying around. There was literally no thought to build this setup right here. You guys could build this incredibly easy. I guarantee you don't even have to have these boards. You could use miscellaneous materials laying around in your shop to create a beveling jig. So all I have to do now is just loosen the clamp on this side, move those boards forward. I'll probably put a little mark there so I know how far forward I moved it. And then what will happen is when I start filing, material will come off the edge and I'll see a new line on this bevel, and I'll file it until that line moves up to right there at the top. And then I'm going to come in and clean out these corners that I talked about right here. I'll show you how I clean those up to get this radius, and then I'll go ahead and sand this out before heat treatment. Alright, let me show you how I do this inside corner. So now I took out my stop there. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to start taking that tip out. Now, that's as far as I'll take it with this rough cut file. Then I'll come in here and I'll clean this up with the same file with 220 grit sandpaper wrapped around it, and I'll be able to clean this bevel up completely. I'll flip it over, I'll do all 4 sides like this to make them match up and be equidistant from the center line here, so I can get this nice perfect bevel line that I'm looking for that sweeps right out of this little cutout that I did on each side of the blade. This bevel here is now sanded to 220, And you can see the sandpaper, to get it sanded from rough ground to 220, brought me closer to my center line. That's why I left this much room between my bevel and the center line, because I knew sanding would bring me closer to that line. And then after heat treatment, when I go ahead and finish sand this, I'm going to try to get a nice perfect ridge that comes up to a point and has a ridge right down the center of the dagger. So also, when I hand sanded this, my tip slid over just a little bit. This ridge line slid over just a little bit from the tip. And that's also expected because I haven't sanded this side. And when I sand this side, I will true that ridge back up to right to the center of the tip. Oh yeah. 220. Both sides. Starting to come together. Just in case you guys wonder how much sandpaper I use, there's a pile, but that's how much it took to sand out the 4 bevels. Just the pre-sand with the 220 grit. That's a lot of paper. So now I'm going to go ahead and clean up my flats. I've got my surface plate here. You can use anything that's just super flat to do this. And basically just lay it on there. You don't want to put a lot of pressure on the front of the blade because it'll widen this section here. So this is I really only put pressure on the handle. See how I'm bending my fingers up? Because I don't want to push down on the blade. The reason is there's so much less material here than here. If you push down on the blade at all, you'll remove more material here, and this line down the center will change. And you don't want that. So I've got it fixtured up in this sled now. Now these edges aren't sharp, so I'm not really worried about them cutting me, so I've let them lay out over the edge. But this is where I'm going to take the same 220 grit paper. I'm going to work the blade in this direction and get my scratch pattern going lengthwise and make sure that I've got it all the way up to 220. This is awesome. But we can elevate this by doing a clay hamon and differentially heat treating this. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to take this blade right here and we're going to apply Satanite. Satanite is a refractory cement that I like to use. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a nice thick layer right down the center. That's going to be my start. The thickest layer should be right down the center. Alright, so that's what I ended up with. Right there, nice and thick. Both sides. Tried to keep it kind of semi-symmetrical, and we'll see if that works. So now I'm just going to hang this like that and let it dry for 24 hours, and then we'll heat treat it. I went ahead and enlisted some help in the shop. Super great with fire. Paper sucks.
Why do you do that?
Okay, here, write it again. Talk about a pro. All right. Here where I live, it's 19 below zero, so I'm going to go ahead and preheat my oil this time. You guys don't necessarily have to have a forge to heat treat this knife. You could just as easily do this with a torch. You could just set a torch up in a vise, move the knife in front of the torch flame back and forth until you achieve non-magnetic. You'll see the magnet right underneath my forge in the front, right under the doors in the opening of my forge right there. You can see my magnet. In the next shot, you'll see it right there. I take the knife back and forth until I start to see the knife glow on the edges, and I will bring it out and I'll start testing it on that magnet. I'm using 1084 steel in this project, and it doesn't require a long soak time once it achieves non-magnetic. So get it to non-magnetic and you're good to quench. On this one, I've decided to bring over a bucket of water. Since I am doing a hamon and I've got clay on it, I want that edge to do a very rapid water quench, so I'm going to pull it out of the forge when it hits non-magnetic. I'm going to very rapidly dunk it in my bucket of water and then move it over to my slower quenching oil, and that's going to give me a nice hamon that'll pop out in the end. Make sure that if you try this, you don't leave it in the water too long. It needs to be incredibly rapid. Nice and hard. You have to make sure that you let this cool all the way down before you test it with the file. So many people pull this right out of the quench and then they file test it and they think, oh, I better re-quench it because it didn't harden up. But you gotta let it finish its transformation. You gotta let it cool for a minute and make sure that it's nice and that the metal's gone through its full transformation. I went ahead and dug through my drawer of miscellaneous parts. I had these left over from another build. You know, these were the leftover pieces here. And then I had these pretty cool scales that came from Ukraine. I chose these scales and these scales because they are already flat, which is going to make this build easier. When you're doing something like this with just hand tools, you know, if I started with a block of wood, that's going to increase the amount of tools that we'd have to have and the amount of work that we have to do. So if you're going to try to do one of these with hand tools, I would suggest purchasing material that's already good and flat, so all you have to do is true it up on a surface plate or something like that with some sandpaper. So I'm going to use this right here for some contrasting color for the bolsters, and then we're going to use this wood down here for the handle material. I'm actually going to do these separately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay these on here, drill my holes, shape the top of my bolster, glue those up, clean my glue lines. After that's set, I'll go ahead and fit these scales up, drill the holes, and glue the scales separately. We'll do this in a couple different sections. Here's what I'm going to do. I've laid my knife out, and I've gone ahead and lined it up with my line that I have across here. And then I've come in with my scribe, and I've put a dot right in the middle of each one of these holes. So I went ahead and brought this cap back. I laid the knife right over the top. I drew around the edges of the knife. I laid the cap on here, traced out where I wanted that. Now I'm going to set this in the vise to where the pins are level with the vise, and we'll go ahead and cut off all this excess material. Alright, so we went ahead and profiled those to rough shape. Now we'll take them. We got to get all the file marks. See all those file marks on there? We got to get those file marks out. So I just take these and I'll drag them across the piece of sandpaper. This is the front edge of our scales. Everything's cleaned up and cleaned with acetone. We're ready to do the glue up. So I'm going to go ahead and mix my 2-part epoxy here. It's really cold in the shop, so my epoxy's cold also. I know which side this is because the other side has my Sharpie marks on it. So I know which side that I'm putting the glue on. These scales I brought in from Ukraine. absolutely beautiful wood, but I'll soon find out how terrible they smell. Oh my goodness, when you cut this wood, it stinks terribly. Worse than ironwood. I'm just going to go ahead and take them, throw them on the surface plate, and flatten them out. It's always a good practice to start with the flat piece. Checking to make sure there aren't any light gaps in between the two pieces and that they fit up nice and smooth. Perfect. I'm going to do my handle fitment slightly different on this build, mainly because I glued the bolsters on first, and if they're not absolutely perfectly symmetrical, I think this is a better method. I'll lay one scale down and I'll drill my holes in it. Then I'll put the new scale on the bottom, I'll put the scale that I've already drilled the holes in on top, and I'll drill through the top scale into the bottom scale, and that's going to ensure that both scales meet up with the bolsters perfectly. Now here you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm going to put the new scale on the bottom. There we go. Now the scale that I've already drilled my two locator holes in, I'll put on the top. And I did flip the knife over for this, by the way. So now I'll put the scale on top. And after I drill this hole, you're going to see me take a pin and put it through the hole as a locator. That's going to hold both the scales in the exact same place. I'll make sure that they're seated up against the bolsters correctly, and then I'll drill my second hole. This will definitely ensure that these handle scales will mate up to my bolsters with no gaps. Perfect. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the glue up off camera. There it is. Came out great. All glued up, ready to remove some excess material. Over to the angle grinder. Now this raised a lot of eyebrows in my last video. I got several comments about how dangerous this is right here. I'd like to say a couple things about how I'm using my angle grinder. One, this is a flap disc, and I don't see it being any different using my angle grinder like this than using a disc sander or a disc grinder. It seems absolutely identical to me. I even run my disc sander at similar speeds to the angle grinder mounted like this. It's very solid in the vise and it's not going anywhere. And I think that this is a really neat method for you to hold your stock very squarely to the angle grinder and get pretty decent grinds for profiling. I was draw filing this to flatten this out because as I took off the brunt of the material with the angle grinder, and then I came in here with the file, a round file in this area up here, and then a flat file on this area. And all I did was keep the file flat so that this is 90 degrees, and you just continue to shave the metal off, draw filing, and that flattens all your little valleys and peaks out until you have a nice smooth flat spine right there. And you're going to work that all the way around the butt of the knife and the other side until both sides are nice and congruent. Now I'm in here with my 500 grit and I'm just further cleaning up this spine, making sure that I'm using a hard backer so that I'm not, filing away the wood faster than the metal. And it still will get rid of the wood slightly faster than the metal, even with the hard backer, when you start getting extra layers of sandpaper up here. So you just need to be careful to keep everything square and 90 degrees. Sand your profile out. That up there, and then I just use a little piece of a round up here. Sometimes if I get a lot of wraps around my sandpaper here, I can just use this to do this radius. Now that I've got the profile done, it's time to sand these flats out again. Now here's where we give the knife handle some shape. So right now, we've got it square here, and it's flat and polished here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to measure off with this guy right here. We're going to create a distance that... You've seen me do this on all my knives. There's no reason why I wouldn't do it on a knife like this. Create that line all the way around the knife. This is my grind 2 line here. We'll put that on both sides. I'll show you here in a second what this looks like. All right. So that's how thick it's going to be on the side. Now we're going to cut in. Now if I do the same thickness right here, then it'd just be a short triangle, and this would be a big long flat section here. And I'm not really going for that. I'd like it a little more round, so I'm going to widen this out just a little bit, and we're going to draw another line here all the way around. I'll come in here with the file, and I'll just just like that. See how I've almost met my... Actually, I can go a little bit farther here. It's funny, I didn't see it in person, but when I looked through the camera, I could see it. Kaboom. A little bit more down here. Nice even bevel. Right there, all the way down. Now I'll do this here on all 4 sides, and then I'll bring it over here and start rounding it out. Now I've got those cut in all the way around, I'm just going to do a gentle shoe shine method here. Just to round my edges slightly, not much. I didn't want them to be that crisp. I'm going to tape this off a little better so I don't get any scratches on it. That would really suck. So I'm holding the paper like this. I'm not coming down. I'm holding it out like this because I'm just trying to dome over the handle slightly, just to give it some curvature. So basically I cut in 2 facets, and it had a ridge line up here on both the facets, and I'm knocking that ridge line down to kind of just give it a gradual dome. So I'm using Mother's aluminum mag and wheel polish. Yep, You heard me right. Aluminum mag and wheel polish. It actually works very well for polishing plastics and hardwood handles and different things like that in knife making. Give it a try, you'll be surprised. And it's super cheap. Well, this build went amazingly well, actually, with using hand tools. I learned several things. One, filing in bevels works incredibly well. I actually super enjoyed filing in the bevels. Number two, the biggest thing that I learned in this entire build was that I've become reliant on my nice tools, especially my drill press. The most fuss that I got on the entire build was trying to drill my holes with a hand drill. What a pain in the behind. I would have to build a jig, a 90-degree jig, to hold my drill straight to accurately drill my holes to do this without a drill press. If there was one tool that I think helped me more than anything in the knife shop after this build here, would have been the drill press. Definitely worth the money, pick up a drill press, because doing it with a hand drill, it was no fun. And it was very difficult. Anyhow, I'm going to bring you in and show you guys the knife. Here's the knife. I think it came out really well. The only thing I was fussed about was where the holes were drilled for the pin placement. I think I could have done better, and I will next time. Here's the deal on this, guys. If you're wanting to get into knife making and you're a little bit unsure about what to buy or where to buy it, I'm going to make it real easy for you. Jump over to my Etsy store. The link is in the description. I'm selling these kits right here, and what you'll get in the kit is the exact same piece of steel that I used in the video and comparable handle material with the pin stock. Basically everything you need to complete this knife in your own shop minus the tools. So go and check it out on my Etsy store. Make this knife. Make sure you send me pictures after you make it. Well, that wraps up this build, guys. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you can reference my channel when you're doing your own builds. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.